the nurse administered an IV to Islam after the weigh-ins and prior to the fight. Now, what would happen?
Would it ever be or sound believable if it is mentioned that a vicious fighter like Islam Makhachev had to cheat to win a UFC fight? Almost sounds impossible, right? Well, unfortunately, the speculation around his fight against Alexander Volkanovski is still continuing, and it has left UFC fans all around the world with a lot of questions. Islam Makhachev is a Russian mixed martial artist currently competing in the lightweight division of the Ultimate Fighting Championship, UFC. He made his UFC debut in 2014 and has since compiled an impressive record of 13 wins and only 1 loss. And this record has earned him recognition as one of the most successful Russian fighters in the promotion. Islam is not the younger brother of the legend Khabib Nurmagomedov, like some UFC fans believe, but rather, they are both from the same country, look alike, and trained in the exact center until Khabib's retirement. Alexander Volkanovski, on the other hand, is an Australian professional mixed martial artist who currently fights as the UFC featherweight champion and is a former featherweight interim champion. Volkanovski is the first Australian fighter to become a UFC champion. Volkanovski began his professional MMA career in 2012 and has since amassed an impressive record of 25 wins and 2 losses. Before the UFC 248 match, many people had speculated on how the fight would unfold and what to expect from both fighters. But one thing no one saw coming was the controversy that came out post-fight, especially in the way it happened. In today's video, we will take a look at scenarios that beg the question of whether Islam cheated his way to winning or not. During the much anticipated fight, both Islam and Volkanovski went back and forth in a highly competitive and technical affair. Alex looked sharper and stronger and took his striking game very seriously from the start. But Islam was definitely not going to have it, as he had a power advantage after wobbling him with short shots. Alex knew what he was up against and was not going to have it, as he managed to hurt him multiple times on the feet and in many rounds. In the 5th round, Alex showed the tremendous fight IQ he's known for by securing a takedown and punishing Makhachev with some classic ground and pound, which made him get a nod on the final scorecard. Volkanovski showed immense endurance to wriggle out of countless chokeholds and somehow defended well enough to give himself a chance to win with a strong end to the fight, making many assume that he should have won the fight over Makhachev. Henry Cejudo would not take this and says otherwise. Before the fight, he commends Alex for having the courage to fight Islam, but he says he thinks that's too much fight for Alex to handle, and he's of the opinion that he will get whipped by Islam. Henry says, quote, "There's nothing that Alexander can do because of what the sport of wrestling has taught Islam. I competed in Dagestan. I've been humbled in Dagestan. I owe a lot of my success to Dagestan." Cejudo said, "Islam, where he comes from, and the lineage of Olympic champions and world champions, all these different disciplines in his country, he can get the best of the best." After the UFC 284 bout, Henry sat and rewatched the fight, and he gave another analysis of it. Initially, when many thought Alex won the fight, Henry also thought he did, but rewatching the fight was an eye-opener for him, as Henry saw that the 2nd round went to Islam as well, which made Islam win 3 rounds over Alex. Well, the real question is, did Islam cheat his way to winning? Islam Makhachev was accused of using a banned IV treatment to rehydrate before his win over Alex Volkanovski at UFC 284. And during this match, Islam retained his lightweight title with a narrow decision win over Alex. What's that, I hear you say? Quote, using an IV to rehydrate doesn't sound like cheating, and is certainly not in the same category as using PEDs. I hear you loud and clear, so let's remind ourselves of WADA and the UFC's stance on the use of IVs for rehydration. The World Anti-Doping Agency, WADA, prohibits the use of intravenous infusions and injections unless they are medically justified and given in accordance with the International Standard for Therapeutic Use Exemptions, TUES. UFC has adopted the WADA code for their anti-doping program, which means that the use of IVs is strictly prohibited unless it is medically justified and approved by the UFC's anti-doping agency. Before 2015, the use of an intravenous drip IV was allowed in the sport, but once it was realized that it could help fighters mask the use of other prohibited substances, it became prohibited in the sport. The United States Anti-Doping Agency, USADA, frowns strictly on the use of IVs, and any fighter caught in this process can be suspended for as long as 2 years. Many UFC fighters have fallen short of this and face different punishments. For example, John Jones? Jones was fined and suspended for a year in 2016 after he tested positive for clomiphene and letrozole and for admitting to using an IV after weigh-ins without prior approval from the UFC's anti-doping agency. Yoel Romero. In 2016, Romero was also sanctioned for using an IV after his fight against Ronaldo Souza at UFC 194. Romero was suspended for 6 months and fined $15,000. Tim Means? In 2016, Means was suspended for 6 months and fined $10,000 after he tested positive for a banned substance and admitted to using an IV after weigh-ins. Lyoto Machida. In 2019, Machida was fined and suspended for using an IV after his fight against Gegard Mousasi at Bellator 228. Machida was suspended for 18 months and fined $13,700. BJ Penn was handed a 6-month suspension in 2016 for the illegal use of an IV treatment, and also Paulo Costa in 2017. It's worth noting that the use of IVs for rehydration purposes after weigh-ins is strictly prohibited by the UFC's anti-doping program, and any fighters who are found to have violated this rule are subject to strict penalties, including fines, suspensions, and disqualifications from fights. It's also worth noting that there's currently no official case against Islam Makhachev's use of IVs, as he has not been sanctioned or accused of any violations related to IV use in the UFC. However, post-fight, UFC lightweight contender Dan Hooker claimed that Islam Makhachev used intravenous IV therapy, which was banned since 2015 to prepare for his first title defense. The accusation began when Dan took to his Twitter and wrote, quote, "Thinks he can fly to Australia. Hire a nurse to give him an IV and we won't find out? Cheating dog." He goes on to tweet and this time drags USADA into it. Dan says, quote, "USADA doing nothing. Prove me wrong. Bet you can't. He doesn't cheat. He doesn't win." There was a lot of speculation immediately concerning who Dan could be referring to by his speculations, but he couldn't hold on anymore as he directly called Islam out and finally tweeted, "Islam is a cheat." A straightforward and direct accusation. While this might be a very serious allegation, it seems as though those who have accused Islam of this are very sure of what they are saying and have even accused USADA of doing nothing and letting Islam get away with it. Let's take a moment to forget that Alex and Dan train in the same center and look into this accusation. Pretty serious, right? But what is the percentage that this accusation is true or false? The interesting thing about this accusation is how easy it is to link Islam with this claim, especially if one considers the history of the Russian people when it comes to doping. Doping in Russia has been an issue for many years, with athletes and coaches being accused of using banned substances to gain an unfair advantage in sports competitions. The World Anti-Doping Agency, WADA, has been investigating the Russian anti-doping agency, RUSADA, since 2015, and in 2016, WADA declared RUSADA non-compliant with the World Anti-Doping Code. This non-compliance has led to the suspension of the Russian Olympic Committee, ROC, and the banning of many Russian athletes from the 2016 Olympic Games. Systematic doping of Russian athletes has resulted in 48 Olympic medals being stripped from Russia and other Russia-associated teams, which is 4 times the number of the next highest and more than 30% of the global total. More than 150 Russians have been caught doping at the Olympic Games. Another fascinating thing about doping among Russians is that, rather than being an individual choice, it is often state-sponsored and systematic, with the Russian state being found to have supplied steroids and other drugs to athletes. An example of Russians who have been linked to doping in the past is Grigory Rodchenkov. Grigory is the former head of Russia's National Anti-Doping Agency, and he is known for his involvement in the state-run doping program in Russia. Grigory's job was to expose those who did doping, but ironically, he concealed the truth and partnered with the state for this. In 2015, it was discovered by the World Anti-Doping Agency, WADA, that Grigory was at the heart of the positive drug test cover-up and had destroyed 1,417 urine samples. After much scrutiny and investigation that linked Grigory to doping in Russia, he confirmed the truth to the WADA Independent Commission, stating his involvement in the doping concealment, and this led to Russia's partial ban from the 2016 Summer Olympics and the 2018 Winter Olympics, and Grigory was also placed under the United States Witness Protection. This shows how much Russians are deeply rooted in the act of doping, and linking any of their athletes to this crime would be justifiable. And as much as we cannot tell if Islam cheated, the possibility of it happening is quite high by checking his country's history. Possibly when all is said and done, the most important facts of this case are simply that the independent judges scored the fight for Islam and Dan Hooker is a teammate of Alexander Volkanovski. Dan Hooker was simply looking for an explanation of how Australia's greatest mixed martial artist and his teammate could have lost this very close contest. While team loyalty is admirable, we don't want to see anyone's reputation damaged unjustly. We wait and see if the UFC will investigate further. But more importantly, we wait for the rematch, which will no doubt be a high-stakes fight. Did you enjoy this video? If you did, please like and subscribe to our channel so we can bring you more enticing UFC content like this. Until next time, please take care and do not forget to stay safe.